Hi, I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. We had a fairly eventful council meeting tonight, but first things first. We had several speakers show up relating their personal experiences with yet another shooting at a short-term rental in Plano. So at first I thought I had heard a dozen shots were fired just a few nights ago after another short-term rental party house turned violent. Apparently it was some 30 shots were fired, gunfire exchanged. It's a wonder nobody was hit, to my knowledge, but a bullet did go through, and we heard the testimony from the mother of a 3-year-old girl's playroom. This is absolutely inexcusable. Short-term rentals don't have a monopoly on violence or murder or gunfire, but from what I have seen, they have an outsized proportion of it. So I have asked tonight to place on the council agenda for our first meeting in April an actual ordinance restricting short-term rentals in Plano. At our very next meeting, which is going to be the first meeting in March 13th, during preliminary open meeting, we will discuss what such an ordinance would look like, the provisions that we would put into it, and then give staff instruction to actually craft the ordinance to bring back to us at the first meeting in April for consideration and a vote. So, as I said tonight on the dais, the short-term rental concerns first got put on my radar back in 2019. With the murder at a short-term rental party house in Plano, in East Plano. And for more than 3 years now, we've had several discussions about short-term rentals, and we've researched, we've looked at various lawsuits occurring throughout the country and the Metroplex, and we seem to keep kicking the can down the road. So the signs that folks were holding up tonight, and the Texas Neighborhood Coalition has been coming to the council meetings for about a year now to request or demand action on short-term rentals, because even when there's no gunfire, they're extremely disruptive. Even when they're not party houses, they're revolving doors of people who are not neighbors. The signs they held up tonight said, "Enough is enough." It's very apropos. So one of the things that I also said tonight, because Thursday is Texas Independence Day, I was simply commemorating Texas Independence Day and 187 years since we declared independence as the Republic of Texas, and inviting folks to come to our second annual Texas Forever Fest on Saturday, March 25th. Now, before Remember the Alamo became the cry of, the rallying cry of the fledgling Republic of Texas, the first rallying cry started at the Battle of Gonzales, was the Gonzales flag, where the settlement of Gonzales had a cannon for defense, which Santa Anna's government tried to confiscate. So after some discussion, they said they were going to defend their cannon with their cannon, and they crafted a flag that had the picture of the cannon, the Gonzales cannon, and it said, "Come and take it." Well, with the addition of the ordinance on a short-term rental restriction and all the concerns around that, that's kind of my sentiment now. So for everybody who wants to keep short-term rentals operating in residential areas in a place like Plano, which is not an entertainment or a vacation destination, I'm kind of feeling like, come and take it. I've got 3 daughters myself. I don't want a situation where a bullet could enter their window. Playroom, bedroom, any room. That stuff is not supposed to happen in the city of excellence, and we should not create the circumstances in which it's more possible than average. So that was event number 1. event number 2, we had 2 separate discussions about DART, Dallas Area Rapid Transit. So the first discussion goes back almost 4 years. Ever since I got on council in 2019, I've been asking for how much money is DART actually spending in and to the benefit of the people of Plano. And we're told for a long time, we don't track that. Well, can you start tracking it? Well, maybe we can do something. Nothing ever happened. Last legislative session, Representative Matt Shaheen filed a bill to require transparency and disaggregating the amount of money that DART spends to the benefit of each member city. So that got DART's attention, naturally. And so we know how much we pay in. By the way, for anybody who hasn't heard me speak about this before, you pay generally 8.25% sales tax anywhere you go in Texas. 6.25% of that is the state's share. Cities have the option to levy an additional 2%. Most every city does that. So for the total, 6.25 plus 2 is 8.25. Well, out of our 2 cents of sales tax that the city of Plano can levy, by being a DART member city, we have to fork over 1 cent, half of all of our sales tax, straight to DART. So we can track very closely to the penny how much we're paying into the DART system. This year, it'll be a 106 million of your dollars paid into the DART system. All we want to know is how much of that 106 million is spent to the benefit of the people of Plano. Because track laid or buses run in Garland doesn't do us any good unless it's bringing people directly from here to there or vice versa, which you can track that fairly closely too. So anyway, DART then asked if they just provided us this information, would we be okay with withdrawing the bill? So I said, okay. That was last legislative session in 2021, so almost 2 years ago. Didn't happen for a while, and then approximately a year later, we received a report from DART. The city of Plano received a report from DART talking about the value to us. And they simply expressed it as the total amount of money DART spends divided by the total population of all 13 DART member cities times the population of Plano. Now, DART could literally spend not 1 penny in Plano and still throw out the same calculation. Doesn't answer the question. So this is like a 14 to 16 page report. Buried toward the end was some math that I could use. So there was the ridership in Plano, which is tracked, funnily enough. There's how much those people spend of their own money on DART, because DART's subsidized, but people still have to pony up a little money to ride DART. And then there's how much they would have to spend if they were to provide their own transportation, if DART weren't available. Okay, so that's math I can use. So the difference between what they actually spend and what they would have to spend were it not for DART, that's the subsidy. So using that math with the ridership, and I was generous, I assumed every day of the year was a peak ridership day. No holidays, no weekends, no nothing, just business days, 365 days a year. I calculated that for less than half of the $106 million that we're putting into DART, we just get everybody free Uber. Well, I don't think free Uber for everybody is the right answer for public transit, but it just goes to show you that well, first, we can do the math on the numbers if given the numbers. And second, that the value proposition is upside down. So I'll just state unequivocally right now that I think in a growing metroplex and in a growing area like North Texas, some form of public transit is not only a good idea, I think it's necessary, but it has to make sense. And DART is running a 40-year-old model. And part of that is by its very structure set by state statute back in the early 80s. And that's why they're operating in roughly a 40-year-old model. So Anyway, fast forward to now. Well, actually, no, fast forward to 6 months ago. I apologize, I'm skipping a bit. This is what I said in the meeting tonight. So all out in the open public. Because of that report a year ago, we said this is no good. We need actual numbers. We need to know where the money is going. And so DART committed to undertake what they're calling a value of transit study. The whole purpose of which was they even hired a consultant for this, to get the 13 DART member cities to weigh in on what an acceptable methodology would be to get at that quantitative value. Well, Plano was the first city interviewed by DART. I was part of that interview. By DART's consultant, I should say. I was part of that interview. And that kicked off the process. 6 months later, the report doesn't have the kind of numbers we asked for. It's a qualitative report. How wonderful DART is. Didn't answer the question, and I don't know how much was spent on that report. So now we are in the 88th legislative session, Texas legislative session, and we are refiling the bill. Representative Matt Shaheen is filing the bill again, and the goal is simply to provide transparency. How is the money that the 13 member cities are putting into DART being spent? So tonight we had this discussion to update our legislative program, which we passed last year, about the issues that the city of Plano as a city would advocate for. So it's not just Shelby Williams, but the city of Plano. So we had the agenda item to discuss adding basically all matters DART to our legislative agenda to give our city staff authorization to pursue that with our state legislators. So that was the transparency bill to, again, provide transparency, hence the term, to make sure that the member cities of DART understand how their money is being spent and to what proportion that money is being spent in their city. There are some nebulous factors of mass transit, like DART, where you can't nail it down to the penny, but there's some pretty good data behind it to where you can get fairly close. So the next thing was the DART ILA. So I spoke about this on the last council recap because basically because of federal infusions of funds to DART, DART had a surplus. And so, of course, it's continued to collect all this sales tax from its member cities, but it had a surplus of funds, and then it was looking to return those funds to the member cities, which, good, it's our money, and it's your money, it's the taxpayers' money from those member cities. So DART wanted to reimburse this money on just that, or I guess I shouldn't say reimburse, give it back on a reimbursement basis. So if we, specifically for transit-oriented projects, so if we engaged in a project as the city of Plano that was transit-oriented, then DART would reimburse us for the cost of that project from that surplus money. So this has been in negotiation for a few months now. And by the way, it means $28 million for the city of Plano. $28 million of your money coming back. So we, as the city of Plano and several of the other member cities, had redlined a proposed ILA, interlocal agreement, with DART to terms that were acceptable for us. When I read it before our last meeting, I was okay with it. And we passed it unanimously. Then those redlined versions went before DART's board, and DART's board rejected the red lines from multiple member cities, including Plano and Dallas. So Dallas Morning News article just talked about the last Dallas City Council meeting where Councilwoman Kara Mendelson with the City of Dallas proposed to get rid of all the City of Dallas's DART board members because the DART board, which is a majority appointed by the City of Dallas, rejected the City of Dallas's red lines. So in tonight's Plano City Council meeting, where actually Councilwoman Mendelson did come speak, but in tonight's Plano City Council meeting, we had DART's version of that ILA brought before us, the same as it was brought back before the Dallas City Council. So we had approved our red line version. The DART board rejected that red line version and put their language back in front of us, essentially saying my way or the highway. And so if we wanted our $28 million, then we were going to do it DART's way, and by the way, jump through a bunch of hoops. So ultimately, that was on the consent agenda. I requested that it be pulled off consent agenda. We ultimately tabled that. Honestly, I wanted to just reject it outright. It would not prohibit the ability for our city manager and staff to continue to negotiate with DART. But it would send the message that DART's version of the ILA was just not going to happen. But it didn't pass, but it did get tabled rather than rejected. So these were two significant DART issues, all the more significant because we authorized our city staff through our legislative program to have discussions related to DART. It is timely because we, as the Plano City Council, are visiting the state capitol in Austin for the next 2 days. Well, actually, you're going to see this on Tuesday morning. I'm recording it Monday night. So today and tomorrow, from your perspective, to discuss a great many things, but DART will certainly be one of them. And now, as the position of the city of Plano, and not just Shelby Williams, we can pursue some of these meaningful changes in DART, and not least of which is transparency. So that's exciting stuff. So for anybody who missed it, we did have some minor discussion during comments of public interest and additional requests for an upcoming council meeting. I had requested at last meeting, I think it was, that at our next meeting, I think I've got that right, our first meeting in March 13th, that might be the second meeting in March, I'll have to double check. But anyway, in March, we have, no, I think it's March 13th, we have a discussion about getting out of HUD, no longer being a recipient of HUD funds. So that's right, that's going to come up at the next council meeting in the preliminary open meeting, where we'll discuss it out in the open and give staff direction to come back with an ordinance, assuming there is council appetite. I'm the one who put it there, so you can guess that there's appetite by me. So I'll just recap my position. We get $2.1 million a year in HUD money, which isn't actually HUD money. It's your money, like all taxpayer money is. And I would like to stop receiving that money from HUD. I would like to no longer be a recipient of HUD funds and no longer jump through HUD's hoops. I would like to come up with that same money internally. We are a very well-to-do city comparatively, and that money is going to go to use somewhere, but I want to come up with that money ourselves, and I want to partner with our nonprofit and faith partners to utilize that money far more flexibly and with far greater efficiency to help the people it was intended to help. We still have around $1.5 million, I think more than $1.5 million that's just in limbo, that's been just sitting there for a couple of years, not actually going to the people it was meant to help. That's HUD money that we are not distributing and using because of HUD restrictions. So I want to get out of that process completely, and I want Plano to take care of Plano, and I want us to work with our broader community, which doesn't stop at the city borders, to take care of our broader community's issues ourselves, the way we know how, without being dictated in how we're going to manage this by Washington, D.C. So those are, I spent 20 minutes now talking about 3 weighty topics that are going to feature very prominently over the next several council meetings. So these are kind of all coming to a head at once, but stay tuned for that. Now I'll move on to some other things. Actually, we never got back to our preliminary open. So we suspended preliminary open meeting because we had to start our regular meeting at 7 o'clock p.m. And it just occurred to me that after we finished our regular meeting, we did not go back to preliminary open, so we'll have to finish the other agenda items later for preliminary open. We did have a discussion about our process for appointing municipal judges. So, of course, we directly source candidates for and appoint the chief municipal judge, which we did relatively recently with our new Chief Judge McNulty. And the process has typically been that the Chief Judge will look for candidates, review resumes, conduct interviews, etc., for Associate Municipal Judges, who are then a small pool of which are presented to council for our approval, basically with the advice and consent of council. So we reviewed that process and discussed adding a little more oversight to it. Now, moving on to the regular meeting, the Salvation Army presented the results of the Red Kettle Challenge. So, as some of you will recall, in 2019, I issued a challenge for charity, for local charities, at which I would wear a Santa hat to the council meeting if we met a certain threshold, a full Santa suit if we met another threshold, and sing the national anthem at a council meeting if we met another threshold. So that started the tradition of several of us wearing Santa hats at the last meeting in December, the last council meeting in December. But then Mayor Pro Tem Prince brought up the suggestion then of the following year, being 2020, doing something that the whole council could get involved in. So at the recommendation from Councilmember Grady, I said, let's all ring the bell for the Salvation Army. And so we started that in 2020. And we just did it for our third year in a row. So in several other cities, we're participating in the Mayor's Red Kettle Challenge for that. So I'm very proud that this tradition has continued. And Lieutenant Marcos Baca with the Salvation Army Plano and Mary Freeman came to announce the winner. Congratulations to Anthony Riccadelli, who raised the most money for the Salvation Army when we were ringing the bell this past December. So congratulations to Anthony, well done. And I look forward to ringing the bell again this December. Collin County Master Gardeners Association was present. This month is Ask a Gardener Month. I'm not a gardener, so don't ask me, but find a gardener and ask them. Comments of public interest featured several speakers about the gunfire erupting at that short-term rental. Of course, I've already filled you in on that, so stay tuned for more. I mentioned Texas Independence Day. And by the way, I also plugged Texans for Fiscal Responsibility recently released their annual report of the top Texas sinkhole cities. So there are a bunch of sinkhole cities on the list. These are basically cities that are in more debt than they can pay, but they're in fiscal management is not allowing them to be in the green or in the black. They actually colored the sunshine cities green. So the sunshine cities are those that are fiscally healthy, and there were only 3 on the list, topped by Plano, I'm very proud to say. So managing your money wisely has, of course, always been one of my top priorities, and the City of Plano staff is doing just that. So Plano is a very well-managed, fiscally well-managed city. And of course, living up to the City of Excellence moniker, we want to make sure that we are living up to that in every regard. So the next thing we discussed was the Downtown Plano PID. That stands for Public Improvement District. It's basically a geographically defined boundary in which assessments, property tax assessments within that go back into publicly improving areas within that geographically defined boundary within the district. That's only $126,000 for the Downtown Plano PID total, but we looked at the board's recommendation to basically disperse that assessment and figure out how the money was going to be used, and that was approved. The next thing we looked at was zoning change, not to a specific piece of land, but to our zoning definitions and categories to better align with our new comprehensive plan, which was passed in November of 2021. And this focused in large part on independent living, which is generally senior living. That is not, that's totally distinct from assisted living or caregiver scenarios. So what we did was we restricted some of the areas in the city where independent living was currently allowed, but not multifamily. So if multifamily was not allowed there, but independent living was, we said that, okay, independent living shouldn't be allowed there either, because that's exclusively in a multifamily environment by its very nature. And then but we left assisted living alone, which doesn't exclusively affect seniors. And there were a few other small changes, but that was the big one there. And the next one was to modify our zoning to update it for the residential community design and neighborhood business design categories, which had been proposed a couple of years ago before we passed our new comprehensive plan in the Envision Oak Point area. So at the time, we said it was putting the cart before the horse to create new zoning categories before we even had a new comprehensive plan. But since the new comprehensive plan was passed, these categories have been revisited and several changes were made to where we had last looked at them a couple of years ago so that they would align with the new comprehensive plan, which of course was the whole point in tabling, was because those discussions then were premature. So we passed this tonight. The highlights are that these categories provide a transition between residential and commercial areas, standard residential and standard commercial areas. And second, they help promote what I've been promoting for a very long time, which is smaller footprint ownership options to increase the diversity of our housing stock. Because, again, broken record, we largely have a dichotomy of housing types. We have large or large-ish single-family homes, and we have apartments. So we're catering basically to two life stages when there are far more life stages and circumstances in which people might find themselves. So we want to diversify that housing type because those housing types, because one of the things that's happening is Plano is aging in place. And our average age is increasing year over year. And as I pointed out in the meeting tonight, part of this is a chicken and an egg game. By not providing diversity of housing types for different people at different life stages, then a lot of empty nesters are staying in the homes that were suitable for them when they had a growing family, but no longer suitable now that they're empty nesters. But they can't find anywhere good nearby to move into unless they wanted to rent an apartment, which some do, a lot don't. And so they're just staying put in that large single family home. Half or 2/3 of which they don't need or want anymore, but without anywhere to go, they just hang on to it. Well, what that does is create artificial scarcity because the growing family who does want to move into something like that can't move into it because it's already occupied and they're not selling because they have nowhere to move to. So anyway, long-winded way of saying that's part of the reason our demographics are aging, because we don't have the housing stock into which those younger families can move. And by the way, that has a community-wide impact. It's like dominoes. When people are aging in place like that and younger families aren't moving in, well, guess what happens to the enrollment at the closest schools to where that's happening? It starts to decline. It has a ripple effect throughout the entire community. So the real part of the challenge of the job of city council or any governmental body is to look out several decades and anticipate not what the future will look like in several decades. Nobody can do that, but to create the sort of environment and circumstances and policies that will allow us to roll with the punches and adapt as effectively as possible. So those are my closing thoughts. This is a fairly long recap. I hope you made it this far. If you did, congratulations and thank you for bearing with me. I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. Good night and God bless.